You are listening to We Saw the Devil, an investigative and conversational true crime podcast that deep dives into fascinating criminal cases that are solved, unsolved, or ongoing. From America's Lori Vallow to Germany's Armin Meiwes, we examine and discuss the world's most shocking cases. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to follow us online. Check us out at WeSawTheDevil.com and We Saw the Devil on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And don't forget, you can become part of the show by backing us on Patreon. Hello everyone, you are listening to We Saw the Devil. This is Robin, and I am here with a really quick weekend mini-sode update on the Gabby Petito case. If you recall, last week I discussed the fact that the Petito family, both sides, are suing Chris and Roberta Laundrie, Brian Laundrie's parents. Brian Laundrie's infamous journal entry was finally released by the Laundrie family attorney Stephen Bertolino this past week, and I'm going to read the entire entry in a moment. But a few additional tidbits of information surfaced, not as a result of the hearing for the motion to dismiss this past Wednesday, but just in complete coincidence. First, let's really quickly get our housekeeping out of the way. You're listening to We Saw the Devil. You can find us at WeSawTheDevil.com. From there, you can find us across all social media as well as our Patreon, where in our Patreon, I actually just hired someone to assist with the Patreon to get everything back on track and moving forward. Patrons, you may see someone named RC. She is amazing. I've known her for 15 years, and she is going to get us into tip-top shape. So I'm super excited to make our Patreon what I wanted it to be all along and have that high level of involvement. All right, so as I mentioned in the previous episode, Gabby Petito's family is suing Chris and Roberta Laundrie for intentional infliction of emotional distress. What have we learned over the last couple of days? Well, on Friday, both attorneys, Patrick Riley and Stephen Bertolino, traveled to the FBI office in Tampa, Florida to pick up evidence. The first news item I would like to cover is that Roberta Laundrie wrote Brian a letter. The letter was apparently written after Gabby Petito had been killed. In an interview with JB from WFLA News in Florida, Patrick Riley, an attorney for Gabby's parents, provided some additional insight and details. And here is what we know. A letter was found in the Laundrie home after Brian returned to Northport. The letter had been taken out of the van. And there's a little bit of confusion surrounding this particular letter. It sounds like the letter was originally in the van. If you recall, the FBI did seize the van and process it, but the letter was actually found inside. I'm not sure if the FBI found it and thought that it wasn't important. I have absolutely no idea. I can't imagine that to be true. But the letter itself was found in the Laundrie home. It is believed that Brian received this letter before he traveled back home to Florida, so out on the road, Wyoming, Utah. Patrick Riley said that there were some very, quote, direct quote, extreme things in the letter. But he refused to expound on that because he did not have it in his possession. Stephen Bertolino, the Laundrie attorney, has the letter in his possession, but is refusing to give it over. The letter is undated, and they believe that it was written after Gabby was killed, but before Brian took his own life. On the outside of the letter, there were the words, "burn after reading." And this letter is a key piece of evidence in this Petito lawsuit, as it's an attempt to show that the Laundries knew Gabby was deceased, but still kept their mouths closed. There was also a, quote, offer to assist Brian with some things in that letter, according to Patrick Riley. He said, scenarios presented by Roberta, like, if you go to jail, I'll bake a cake and put a knife or a saw in it. In a separate interview with Brian Enton of WFLA, Riley says that there was another offer in the letter that has to do with Gabby. He has not expounded on that or provided any additional details there. But he very much implied that this letter is incredibly, incredibly extreme and does implicate Roberta to a great degree. Now, this letter will be released at some point, but it has not been made public as of yet. Patrick Riley is disgusted that Stephen Bertolino claims to be transparent, yet is cherry-picking which items he actually releases out to the public. You know, we trashed Mark Means from the Lori Vallow case quite a bit for his ineptitude, his incompetency. For me, Stephen Bertolino may take the cake. He's saying that the letter from Roberta was written months before the trip was even made, or at least at least where Gabby was killed. Okay, so why was Roberta telling Brian that she would help break him out of jail and then offer up multiple scenarios to help him, and then also an offer to help with Gabby. Make that make sense, please. How does he not realize that that makes it look even worse? So we have a letter on the horizon that is going to be released, but has not been made public as of yet. Now, let's talk about this journal entry. Brian's journal. Everyone heard about the journal. It was recovered inside of his backpack. It included an 8-page confession. And this wasn't a full-size notebook. It was like one of the smaller spiral tops. But this notebook did include an 8-page confession. And I'm going to go ahead and read that in full now. For those who are interested, I'll go ahead and post the link in the show notes so you can see pictures of the notebook and also read the full transcription. Brian wrote, "Gabby, I wish I was right at your side. I wish I could be talking to you right now. I'd be going through every memory we've made, getting even more excited for the future. I can't live without you. I've lost every day we could have spent together, every holiday. I'll never get to play with," and then that part is unintelligible again. "Never go hiking with TJ. I loved you more than anything. I can't bear to look at our photos, to recall great times because it's why I cannot go on. When I close my eyes, I will think of laying on the roof of the van, falling asleep to the sight of a meteor shower at the Crystal Geyser. I will always love you." If you were reading Gab's journal, looking at the photos from our life together, flipping through old cards, you wouldn't want to live a day without her. Knowing that every day you'll wake up without her, you wouldn't want to wake up. I'm sorry to everyone this will affect. Gabby was the love of my life, but I know adored by many. I'm so very sorry to her family because I love them. I consider her younger siblings my best friends. I'm so sorry to my family. This is a shock to them as well as a terrible grief. They loved as much, if not more than me. A new daughter to my mother, an aunt to my nephews. Please do not make this harder for them. This occurred as an unexpected tragedy. Rushing back to our car, trying to cross the streams of Spread Creek before it got too dark to see, too cold. I hear a splash and a scream. I could barely see. I couldn't find her for a moment, shouted her name. I found her breathing heavily, gasping my name. She was freezing cold. We had just came from the blazing hot national parks in Utah. The temperature had dropped to freezing and she was soaking wet. I carried her as far as I could down the stream towards the car, stumbling exhausted in shock, when my knees buckled and knew I couldn't safely carry her. I started a fire and spooned her as close to the heat. She was so thin, had already been freezing too long. I couldn't at the time realize that I should have started a fire first, but I wanted her out of the cold and back to the car. From where I started the fire, I had no idea how far the car might be, only knew it was across the creek. When I pulled Gabby out of the water, she couldn't tell me what hurt. She had a small bump on her forehead that eventually got larger. Her feet hurt, her wrist hurt, but she was freezing, shaking violently. While carrying her, she continually made sounds of pain. Laying next to her, she said little lapsing between violent shakes, gasping in pain, begging for an end to her pain. She would fall asleep, and I would shake her awake, fearing she shouldn't close her eyes if she had a concussion. She would wake in pain, start the whole painful cycle again, while furious that I was the one waking her. She wouldn't let me try to cross the creek, thought like me that the fire would go out in her sleep and she'd freeze. I don't know the extent of Gabby's injuries, only that she was in extreme pain. I ended her life. I thought it was merciful, that is what she wanted. But I see now all the mistakes I made. I panicked, I was in shock, but from the moment I decided, took away her pain. I knew I couldn't go on without her. I rushed home to spend any time I had left with my family. I wanted to drive north and let James or TJ kill me, but I wouldn't want them to spend time in jail over my mistake, even though I'm sure they would have liked to. I'm ending my life not because of a fear of punishment, but rather because I can't stand to live another day without her. I've lost out whole future together, every moment we could have cherished. I'm sorry for everyone's loss. Please do not make life harder for my family. They lost a son and a daughter, the most wonderful girl in the world. Gabby, I'm sorry. I have killed myself by this creek in hopes that animals may tear me apart, that it may make some of her family happy. Please pick up all of my things. Gabby hated people who litter. Let's break that down. First of all, it's all bullshit. We now know that there are multiple versions of the confession letter. Again, someone close to the Schmidt family did say that there was another version of a written confession written by Brian Laundrie, where he claims that she died in a creek on a river raft. So this is all just fluffy bullshit that he wrote. Gabby Petito's body was found close to an area that had many tourists. It was like 900 or so feet from the van. He easily could have sought help. Even just him screaming loudly probably would have attracted someone to come help them. That's the area that they were in. Gabby Petito's stepfather in one article described where she was found as being beside a fire ring and a clearing that looked like a place to set up a tent and face the mountains. So this wasn't like a random place. Records also show that Brian would have had full cell service in that area. So his claim of having no way to get help, find help, is frankly bullshit. And again, there are 2 other confessions, guys. The one confession found on an electronic device, and that one gave a slightly different account of the events surrounding her death. And then the second one was also written, but again, gave a slightly altered version of events. And for the confession where Brian claims that they purchased a raft to go down the river, supposedly they purchased a raft in Utah to go down the river. The raft flipped and Gabby hit her head on some rocks and drowns. The FBI apparently actually did hunt down that lead and found no proof of a purchase of a raft, no video, and no proof of purchase on anyone's credit cards. Not only that, but the most interesting part of all of this to me, let me pull back up this notebook letter, is the part where where in this letter, he uses the past tense with Gabby a lot, right? First of all, this note is horribly written. I think that we can all agree with that. Grammatically, the spelling errors are tremendous, whatever. Don't want to come off as classist. That being said, he seems acutely aware of the usage of present and past tense. Gabby was, she was, we were. He very much uses the past tense when talking about Gabby, until he starts talking about his own family. In that, he says, and let me just read this passage really quickly. He says, Gabby was the love of my life. I know she was adored by many. I'm so sorry to her family because I love them. When he talks about and refers to his own family, he says, this is a shock to them as well as a terrible grief. Again, this is a shock to them. He was acutely aware of present and past tense. Why is referring to Gabby in the past tense, but he's referring to his parents knowing about this is a shock to them. To me, that is something that a lot of investigators look at. Every time I see a suicide note, a murder, confession, anything like that, I'm very interested in tense and use of language. In this letter, he says, this is a shock to my family. To me, that implicates the holy hell out of his family. In my opinion, I fully believe that Brian told his parents everything that happened. But where does this all fit in with the civil case? Well, first we need to make sure that the Petito family's lawsuit against the Laundries isn't thrown out. It needs to continue down the pipeline. If it does, then it will go forward and a discovery period will happen. These pieces of evidence will be shared and reviewed either voluntarily between the attorneys or via a Freedom of Information Act request. And keep in mind, everyone, that the FBI basically just closed the case. The property issues, Gabby's property, those issues have been resolved in their eyes, and their involvement in terms of determining whether there will be criminal charges filed, that's done. They deem that there will be no criminal charges against Chris and Liberta Laundrie. And that's why the Petito family went the route of the civil suit. And I hope they sue the living shit out of the Laundrie family. I hope they sue them into absolute fucking destitution. In 6 or 7 weeks or so, all of this information will be pouring into the public sphere if it's not released by attorneys before then. All of the confessions, the letters, the supposed timeline, all of that information is probably going to be released in the next several months. With what we now know, it's been all but 1000% confirmed that Brian's parents knew that Gabby Petito was dead. Did they know that Brian killed her? It's looking likely. And this is actually what sends me into a blind rage. Don't forget that one of Stephen Bertolino's statements that he put out to the Petito family shortly after Brian returned to Northport, back home to his parents, was, "We hope you are successful in your search." I don't have kids. In fact, I honestly don't even like children. I have zero maternal instinct. But what I do have is compassion and empathy. And that is one of the most disturbing, slimy, and fucked up things I've ever heard. This statement was likely given after the letter from Roberta Laundrie to Brian stating, "Hey, I'll help you get out of jail. And by the way, here's multiple extreme scenarios surrounding Gabby." They likely knew what had transpired. But giving false hope to the family has to be one of the most disgusting things I've ever heard. And I know it happens every day in trials and whatnot, but I think that the Gabby Petito case as a whole, for a lot of us, it actually impacted a lot of us. A lot of women I know followed this case just so by the minute because we all saw ourselves and our early relationships. We saw all of that in Gabby, in those interactions on the police chest cam footage. And I know that Stephen Bertolino is doing his job. I mean, the burn after reading on the envelope, he was asked, hey, what does that mean? That's looking pretty dicey. And Stephen Bertolino, the Laundrie family attorney, came out and was like, well, yeah, that was just, that was a movie. He said, I do know it's a movie, and what she wrote on the cover of the letter to Brian many months before the trip had the title of the movie on there. Just holy shit. You and I, everyone who's listening, I have beachfront property in Iowa to sell you if you believe that burn after reading on the cover of this envelope is in relation to a movie, considering these circumstances. And it's above my pay grade and not something that I'm going to get into. There are different, laws and whatnot regarding aiding and abetting and what if your family and so on and so forth. Not getting into that into this episode in terms of why the Laundries were not charged. But I have zero sympathy for them, and I hope that they are pretty much ruined. Not even shy about saying that. I'm not a petty person. I'm not a mean person. I believe that everything should be fair and that our justice system does actually largely work. Emotionally, I don't feel that this is fair. In any case, for this civil trial, remember this past week they went in, they had their arguments for the civil trial to determine whether it's going to continue. Judge Hunter Carroll is quoted as saying he will issue a written decision within 2 weeks. It'll be really interesting to see what actually happens if this is going to continue or if the Laundries are going to be successful in their dismissal. A source close to the Petito family said if it is dismissed, doesn't matter because they are going to divulge and publish everything. And they have every single right to do so, and I would probably be doing the same thing, to be honest. But I just wanted to give this update. It's kind of a big deal, guys. The Gabby Petito case, the entire world was obsessed with it, hunting down Brian. Brian comes up. He had committed suicide in Florida. And then just a lot of quiet. It's almost like the society just kind of like deflated balloon, just kind of, okay, well, this is over now. This is the update on this case currently. It'll be really interesting to see if this moves into civil territory. And then, as always, I will be providing updates as that happens. Again, if you're interested in seeing pictures of the notebook, just click the link in the show notes or below if you're watching on YouTube. Have a safe weekend. Stay cool. Until next crime.